There's been a lot of disagreement in Congress and in the country whether the U.S. should continue to financially support the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. For Ukraine, some taxpayers don't think the U.S. should be giving any money to fight off Russia's invasion. For Gaza, some taxpayers have concerns about how they might be funding weapons that have been used to kill civilians. They're seeing that more than 30,000 people have been killed, that hundreds of thousands are facing starvation, and they want to know how their tax dollars contribute to all of this. Now, obviously, these wars are about much more than the money that is going to them. To figure out how much individual taxpayers are contributing to Ukraine and Israel for these wars, we have to start with how much money the U.S. is sending to these countries as a whole. Which gets complicated because the money that the U.S. sends to other countries goes out under many different categories of foreign assistance. Foreign assistance is your biggest, most broad description of how we're sending money to other countries. Within foreign assistance, you'd have security assistance, you'd have economic assistance, you'd have humanitarian assistance. One form of assistance to other countries is foreign military financing. And that money is all about weapons sales. So foreign military financing means money for buying U.S. weapons, and that's it. U.S. money for buying U.S. weapons. Some of it can be used for training programs. You could use it for fuel. It doesn't have to be a weapon, but it's U.S. money for U.S. weapons, defense articles, defense services. Countries who get U.S. foreign military financing most of the time use that money to buy U.S.-made weapons. For example, the U.S. doesn't tend to give another country U.S. taxpayer money for them to then go out and buy French military weapons. Though they do make exceptions. Israel does have an official agreement with the U.S. that allows them to buy some weapons made in Israel too. Whenever there's going to be a sale of U.S. weapons to any country, the Department of Defense and the State Department notify Congress. And if the potential weapon sale is over a certain amount of money, Congress gets a few days to review the sale, raise any concerns, otherwise it goes forward. Israel has gotten money from the U.S. every year for decades, regardless of whether there's a war. Right now, the agreement is that Israel gets a set amount of money from the U.S. each year. There is a 10-year memorandum of understanding between Israel and the United States that says Israel is going to get $3.3 billion in foreign military financing every year. $3.3 billion for weapons, plus another $500 million for a very specific program, which is missile defense called the Iron Dome. This is what Israel uses to defend against rockets that might be shot into Israeli territory. In all, Israel is getting $38 billion from the U.S. over 10 years. Since the Israel-Hamas war started, the U.S. has given Israel about $3.8 billion. That is 1 year's worth of aid. It makes up less than 0.1% of the total U.S. federal budget. Since the war in Ukraine started, the U.S. has given Ukraine $115 billion. That is 2 years' worth of aid. So let's just say about $60 billion a year, which is about 1% of the federal budget for each year. So Ukraine has gotten significantly more money recently, and more than half of that money was for weapons and defense and training, but a lot of the money also went to economic assistance to Ukraine and some humanitarian assistance. $115 billion, which is what went to Ukraine over 2 years, is about what the federal government has spent on highways over the same period. $3.8 billion, which is what went to Israel in a year, is more than the U.S. spends on veteran homelessness prevention. So we are going to go with their math and how they're looking at all of this. To find the per-person price tag of what the U.S. is sending these two countries, we estimate there are 268 million adults in the U.S. If we assume individual taxpayers make up around 77% of the tax money the government takes in that it can actually spend however it wants, we get an estimate. We just divide the total amount of money given to Ukraine or the total amount of money given to Israel by 268 million adults. The U.S. sent $115 billion in aid to Ukraine. We'll say individual taxpayers may pay 77% of that, and then we'll divide that by the number of potential taxpayers. We get $330 over the past 2 years. So $165 per taxpayer per year for Ukraine. If we apply that same logic to the assistance to Israel, now we're looking at $11.25 per taxpayer for Israel. Of course, this is oversimplified, but it is at least an attempt at figuring out the per-person contribution. So are we okay? Did we do the math? Does that number feel satisfying or meaningful to you? It can be